Hi, it's Hayden Williams here, and it's another episode of the Man in the Mirror podcast. I hope you're well, I hope you're having a good week, and I hope you're ready to hear a bit more about skincare, grooming, fragrance, self-care, and all those good things. On the Man in the Mirror podcast, I talk to a guest or guests each week about their life and about work, and about those key items in their bathroom cabinets, those things they can't do without, and those things they might take away with them in a toilet bag. This week, I have two guests, two for the price of one. It's Laurent Delafon and Chris Yu, who are the co-founders of fragrance brand Ostens. I came across Ostens a few years ago, and they have beautiful fragrances, and one of them, Cedarwood Heart, is one of my absolute go-tos and one of my favourites. I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more as we get into the podcast and talk to Chris and Laurent. But in the meantime, it's me, Hayden Williams, and it's Chris Yu and Laurent Delafon from Ostens on the Man in the Mirror podcast. Here we go. Welcome along to another episode of Man in the Mirror. It's Hayden Williams here. And this week I have double the fun, double the pleasure, two guests. It's Laurent Delafon and Christopher Yu, who are the co-founders of Ostens. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi, Eden.
How are you?
Great, thanks.
All very good here.
Thank you so much for joining me. And I should say I met Chris and Laurent actually first a few years ago, actually quite early in me getting more interested in fragrance and this whole kind of world. And I went along to the Ostens showroom in central London here in the UK, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I have to say, Ostens and Laurent and Chris in particular were very welcoming and kind, and Laurent gave such a fascinating, he gave me, a good hour of his time, gave me such a fascinating insight into not only the brand, but also fragrance and ingredients. And he was one of the first people I sort of properly met within the industry. So I'm really thrilled and delighted that they've both come on the podcast today. So it'd be great to find out a bit more about Ostens, really. How did it come about? And because I know you both have a background in the industry, but how did Ostens start, and when and where, and all those good things?
Hayden, I love that you told us about how you got into the industry as such, because basically I think that's how everyone gets into the industry.
Really, just an interest.
Yeah, a passion. It's not something, if you think back, it's not something we get taught in school. Oh, yes, guidance counselor, careers day, you could be in fragrance. So it's more of something that we all end up discovering and then going deeper and falling in love with.
Yeah.
And I would say I feel very, very touched that you enjoyed the time we spent together at Ostens, and that it helped shaped your understanding of perfumery, or at least it piqued your curiosity. It's good to know I wasn't rambling for an hour plus without purpose. So that's always helpful. But I think what Chris says about you fall into the perfume world, or into a passion or in discovery of perfume. It's not just a discovery per se. It's very often an encounter.
Yeah.
And I know that for my part, I was not at all interested in fragrances until the one day I stepped into the Diptyque original store on Boulevard Saint-Germain in Paris. And I was looked after by none other than the managing director of the company, Mohamed Lataoui.
Oh, wow.
And I realized how, through his passion, it started something in me. And I think that it's good that to have those encounters and those moments to talk about perfume, because that's the only way to think of perfume, really, through conversation.
Yeah. Were you living in Paris, Laurent?
I was living in London, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
And I had never heard of Diptyque before. And I bought a soap at Harrods, and I thought the illustration on the box of soap was really, really cute. I didn't think so much about the smell. And I realized there was an address written on the box. I thought, that sounds interesting. Next trip I'm in Paris, I go and check it out. And lo and behold, that was it.
I think, the great thing about these is that it really tells us that it's just that chance moment. You can plan so much in your life, and yet it all comes down to this sort of chance encounter. And after that, I met Laurent, and for 7-8 years later, we were working with this, at the time, a pioneer in home fragrance and niche fragrance, Diptyque, and we learned everything off Diptyque. I always let Laurent go first because that story is way more glamorous than about a kid in Lower Hutt, New Zealand, which is what we call a bogan town, which is basically white trash town. Oh, I don't even think I can say that anymore. I think, the earliest memory for me in fragrance was, I think I was 13, and it was my birthday, and my grandma bought me this bottle of aftershave, very sophisticated of my grandma. I still remember it. It was called Oxford Blue, and it was like a kind of like a Yardley of New Zealand type toiletries brand, a gift set. And it just opened up this world. And for me, fragrance has always been a way of escaping and dreaming and sort of the glamour of what it represents, especially in a semi-rural small town in New Zealand. It was before the internet, before magazines, were shipped across the world. And it was just the only way I could imagine a world outside of little New Zealand.
It's funny, isn't it? Because people might have different stories like that of different sort of sensory things. And, but the theme of escape is often there. And sometimes it's music or art or dance. And I love that for you. It was, this world kind of opened up through a fragrance your gran bought you. Love it. It's great, isn't it?
So I owe my entire career to my grandmother.
Thanks, Chris's granny.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I feel the same. I think for me, it was, looking back now, it felt like it was always there in the background. And, I always liked fragrance and always had, one or two on the go. And, I like that world. But I think sometimes, there's something that kind of spikes a particular curiosity, and it all opens up into Technicolor and just, and meeting people like you, Laurent, you then just sort of fall down a rabbit hole, don't you, and want to find out more. And I think this, part of this podcast is my discovery of, loving fragrance, but then it's kind of extended further into wanting to know a bit more about grooming and skincare, because lo and behold, when you start finding one world interesting and caring a bit more about how you smell, then it naturally sort of extends into, I'd like to put something good on my face that is, has good efficacy and also is doing good and smells great and all these things. And then before you know it, you're spending too much money like I do on all these different things. It would be great. And having two guests is even better because we can get more insight. But could you tell Chris, actually, first of all, could you tell me a bit about some of those key items in your sort of grooming and skincare regime? I mean, do you have a regime, first of all? Are there certain things that you do? And
do you have 4 hours to talk through my 20-step Korean skincare patting regime?
You should have started with me. I've got 3.
Oh, God. We'll do an extended, with director's cut, Chris, for later on. But pick out your highlights, if you would.
This was the hardest question because I literally could go through every step and why in about 4 hours. I think the number one thing I would pick out is a topical chemical exfoliant. So for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically, instead of a facial scrub, you use a lotion that just exfoliates your skin. And I grew up with extremely bad acne. I went through such a terrible mental health stage of having this sort of pizza face, for want of a better description, and going on the strongest types of prescription medicine, which mess with everything else. And it really wasn't until quite later on in sort of my late 20s, early 30s, that here in the UK, I was introduced to this product. It's Paula's Choice 2% Salicylic acid liquid. That's very specific because it's the liquid. They do 4 different versions, but only the liquid works for me. Right. And that's how specific I am now about my skin. And it just changed everything. And it was this very gentle way of cleaning out the pores. And I think that's what changed everything because it made me think I didn't have to scrub my face off. So this idea of cleanliness and stripping the skin was what I was doing beforehand, but it was actually aggravating, me. And ever since I've used that product, which is probably the oldest product in my regime, the only one I never veer off or try a different version of, because it did transform everything. But the reason why I loved that product as well is because it's a single ingredient, and single ingredients is something that keeps popping up in my world, in personal as well as work life. And I'm sure we'll talk about how we were inspired by that later on with Ostens, because it's very much about ingredients. But it was the moment that instead of just using skincare, there was a way of educating myself, but going down this world of, what works for me. And it's almost meditative in terms of not just buying into an idea or a dream or someone selling you something, but discovering a product that works just for me in some ways.
Yeah. And Chris, does that product kind of stop breakouts then? Other things were drying you out. And
so it's salicylic acid is slightly moisturizing anyway, but it's also a topical anti-inflammatory, antibiotic in some ways. And it just is great for if you've got ingrown hairs, beards, acne, like breakouts every so often, basically anything. It's a bit of a miracle product.
Do you apply that twice a day?
Start with one couple of times a week and then work up to however much you need. I use it every day now at night, but it's totally flexible, and I love that about that product as well.
And I was really interested when you're talking about adolescent acne, and again, it's you'd think it might have done, but it's not something that's come up in the podcast before. I mean, if you're comfortable saying, the kind of psychological side of that is that something that that you still think about now? Were people giving you a hard time, or was it more kind of was it how you were viewing yourself more, do you think?
I think teenagers are the worst, right? Because we just we pick on whatever's different about someone, even if it's kind of amazing, if they're good at sport or if they're good at music or whatever, and you kind of they pick on that. And for me, it was something I couldn't hide. This was the days in the early sort of mid 80s that you didn't have concealers and things that certainly a teenage boy could go access.
But they might have even, that kind of stuff might have even made it worse as well,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
And so I lived for probably 20 years with quite severe acne.
Was it that long?
It was from the moment I hit puberty right up until sort of just before I turned 30 in many ways. It's only now, after sort of a decade of actually not messing up with my skin and not scrubbing it to death, that it's calmed down and it's kind of gone back to normal in some ways.
But it's funny, isn't it, how some people are quite, some people have quite a sort of limited skincare regime. But I guess for you, it's become something, and hearing how passionate you are about it, it's obviously something that's, actually important to you, and it's had a real sort of tangible effect in how you feel about yourself and your skin. It's not just a kind of nice to have part of your day. Sounds like it's become really integral to sort of how you live your life.
I'd actually admit that once I was flying and my luggage was lost, and I was panicking more about where I could get it in the south of Spain rather than, my trip. So, it's the sort of thing that I guess it becomes a little bit of a crutch in some ways, but, it did really transform my skin. So it's the product that I would recommend to anyone that struggles with any sort of breakouts for whatever reasons, but whether they be hormonal or just, actual, weekly, irritations.
Yeah, that's really useful. And then in terms of shaving, grooming, are you a daily shaver? Do you have a regime there?
I am the laziest shaver in the world. I use an electric shaver, and I plane my skin off by just shuffling it over. I never really learnt to, Chinese don't have the same, for some reason, I don't think have the same pace, the speed of hair growth. And so, like, my dad didn't wet shave, he was an electric shaver. And I think so much of all of that gets given to you as a young boy from the other person in your household, which, goes through that process. And in my case, it was my father, and he had an electric shaver. And so I thought, well, that's what I will do. I've tried to wet shave, I think, once in my life, and obviously hacked my skin because
bits of tissue everywhere.
Before you could watch tutorials on how to do it properly, with the grain not against, sort of thing. But
imagine a world without YouTube, guys.
Yeah, I know, especially for skincare. Yeah, so I'm a sort of 2 minutes with an electric shaver in the morning and done.
Great. And Laurent, how about you in terms of, outside of the fragrance world, are there products that you swear by and have with you every day?
Well, I come at it from a fairly different point of view, because I've got the opposite problem, i.e. My pilosity and facial hair grows way too fast. So actually applying beauty products can be a bit of a chore.
Yeah.
And it can be, depending on the formulations, can be actually really, really counter-effective.
Making your skin greasy?
By having big clumps of products attached to hair and blotchy things, blotchy moisturizers and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I tend to have a fairly simple routine, which is a face wash every day in the shower, whatever is available, depending, most of the time I'm traveling. So whatever I can travel with or whatever I can find.
And is it literally that I don't know about your sort of household arrangement. Would it be simply if it's the same thing as a partner's, or would you have a specific face wash that's for you?
Whatever is in front of me. Whatever is in front of me in the shower, literally.
Fine. Yeah.
And a scrub, a facial scrub like type, a fairly abrasive one. So very much the opposite of what Chris just described. Having a fairly abrasive one, like a type of Aesop or something like that, that can slough through the beard, basically through the facial hair. And really, I tend to trim every 3-4 days or so with an electric, with a beard trimmer. I used to wet shave, but that became just too much of a hassle to do it properly every day. It was taking too much time out of my day. So I do the beard trimmer thing every 3-4 days, and that's usually when I tend to apply whatever moisturizer or whatever serum exists on the shelves at home. I am a very equal opportunity user. It really is whatever
whatever you can grab.
Whatever hasn't passed its sell by date or is used by date product, and then I'll try it on. And then SPF in summer, that's for sure. That's the one thing I would just definitely apply. But I only started that but since doing this podcast as well, and the gospel of SPF, and I've definitely sort of added that to my regime, and I think I'm nearly 50, so I think it's a good thing to try and preserve my skin as long as possible. So good thing. Better late than never.
For sure. I hope so.
And for me, the key part of the routine though is scented shower gel. That's my
okay.
That's my thing. I've got an addiction actually for a French brand called Roger et Gallet, which is very, very beautiful, very, very classic fragrances. And this is my thing. That's my I can't do without.
It's one of that brands I've found in hotels sometimes, and it always feels like a real luxury, isn't it, to get some Roger et Gallet? Oh, fantastic! And you try different fragranced shower products then, or do you tend to go for the same one?
Try them all.
Try them all.
Yes. Just because it's pleasant, when there is the olfactive element interwoven with the product. If the product is pleasant on the skin, then the scent is an extra dimension, which I quite enjoy, and I find quite interesting always.
Well, it sounds like the olfactive element is something that sort of inspires you much more than the skincare and the grooming. So in terms of that, obviously we could talk for a long time about favorite fragrances, and that's not really the sort of heart of this. But just in terms of today, if I could ask each of you, starting with Chris, what fragrance have you gone for today?
Oh my God, that's like the hardest question ever.
No, just what you're wearing. Just what you're wearing.
The one you're wearing. The one you just made this morning.
No.
What do you like?
For me, it's you think if I'm going to do a 40-step skincare routine, I'm going to spray one fragrance.
Oh, okay. He's layering, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. So every day I start the fragrance routine with.
Oh my goodness.
No, seriously. So in Ostens, for those who are not familiar, there's we're very much inspired by ingredients, and so we have a preparation oil, which is a single note that perfumers get to use every day, but in an oil suspension that I put on as a base layer. And it's the one I use is Cashmeran Velvet, which gives everything a sort of worn-in, lovely sort of vintage denim / cashmere blanket scarf type feel. And then I'll spray whatever I leave the house with on first, and then by lunchtime I spray a different fragrance on top. And so by the end of the day I've sprayed about 4 things on top of this oil, and oil makes fragrance last longer. So if anyone ever suffers from my fragrance doesn't last very long, is spray it on moisturized skin or something with a bit more oil.
That's a great tip. So the fragrances that you're going to layer on top of the oil, could it be, just things that you're sampling or wanting to try, or is there a more sort of deliberate, this is going to go with this is going to go with this, or can you end up with a sort of unholy mess sometimes?
I don't believe in unholy messes. like great art, a lot comes from mistakes. And I'm not a purist, so I don't really intellectually cerebrally go through the layering of all this will match with that, because I'm not a perfumer, and that's our brand. Neither Laurent and I come from this as technical, scientific, chemist trained perfumers. We come from it from the experiential side, as Laurent mentioned, from the shower gel, of that moment in the shower when you can breathe in the scent of the shower gel. And for me, it's just whatever I'm inspired by, and I'm going to come out on this podcast. I have about 20,000 fragrances from all across the different brands of the last sort of 30 years. So sometimes
20,000.
Yeah, sometimes when I get up in the morning, I'm like, I'm just going to grab whatever my hand goes to. It's like throwing a dart at a map of the world. Yeah.
You must have a big old set of shelves, or are they in many rooms?
Half of it's at the office, so don't strike a match.
Yeah, no, I have seen that. Yeah.
And the other half is either in boxes or in the shelf that regularly sort of rotates in my house, which is probably about to collapse because it's got about 300 fragrances on a shelf.
Yeah. I think the lesson with Chris is like if he suddenly had to, if a taxi had come and you'd just woken up and you've got 2 minutes, I think that's going to be a problem by the sound of the skincare regime.
Oh, yeah.
The fragrance.
I'm missing
you
that
need
flight.
half an hour, right? An hour or...
about 90 minutes.
Laurent, how about you? What are you wearing today? Is it many layers or just the one?
Just the one, I'm afraid. But actually, I remembered that time we met here in Ostens, and in particular how you liked the Impression Cedarwood Heart.
Oh,
so that's what I sprayed on this morning.
Wow.
Coming prepared.
Thank you. We can be brothers in scent. Yeah. I mean, we talked earlier actually before we came on the podcast about this idea of what fragrances you'd have on a desert island and all that, and this top 10s and things, which is always really hard. But Ostens Cedarwood Heart has a very special place in my heart because it was the conversations I had with Laurent, but also it's just one of my absolute go-tos, and it's the quality of the ingredients, but also the scent memories around my grandfather, and it's got a kind of beautiful, smoky, sort of enveloping jacket. Very, very elegant, very sophisticated, but there's something really special about it. So it's definitely one of my favorites. I'm glad you're wearing that one today.
And it's a great fall fragrance as well. So it's matching the weather as well. So
absolutely. And I've been lucky enough to go to a couple of black tie, ball, evening do type things over the last year. And every time, if I'm in a tux, Cedarwood Heart, it's just seems like the right kind of feel for me. Talking of Ostens, and I think it's a good opportunity to talk about the brand a bit more. I think for me, it's a really interesting. Well, it's a fabulous brand, but it'd be great to hear a bit more about how you do it, because some people might not be aware that there's a website, but you have a showroom in London, in the UK. But the way you distribute and the way you get Ostens out to the world is slightly different to some of the other brands, isn't it? Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, Ostens really started from our passion, and dare I say, there was never any business thinking behind it. And Laurent and I sort of chose everything because whether it was the fragrance development or the route to market as such and how we reach our customer, purely because we wanted to be involved, and call us control freaks, but I kind of see it as I love sharing our passion with the end customer. And so when we decided that, there was just no way at that point we could go out just straight into wholesale, which would mean that the product would sit on a shelf with hopefully a trained salesperson of the store, whether it be a department store, a perfumery or fashion store. And I would hope that someone would be able to talk about it, whereas we just wanted to control it. And basically, yes, it's not always as scalable, but we love meeting our community, and we love when people come into our showroom here in central London, or when we host a pop-up and we get to just chat about perfume and fragrance and why they love it. And so that's very much the guiding principle behind Ostens. When we started this brand, and still weirdly, there is no other fragrance brand that I'm aware of that offers the experience to a customer to be able to smell the ingredients that the perfumers smell. So you get to smell unadulterated raw materials, and you get to take them away with you, which again, outside of aromatherapy, which is a completely different approach, these
different quality
things you don't get to try. And if you think
this is sorry, I should explain this. With the Eau de Parfum with Ostens, you get a separate single ingredient oil, as you talked a little bit about before, Chris, and that's part of it can be part of the package, isn't it? So you get the kind of inspiration note, I suppose, the single ingredient as an individual oil, as well as the perfume that it inspired. Is that right?
Exactly. And that was the inspiration behind the brand, full stop. So we wanted you to be able to, as a customer, be able to be inspired by that ingredient. And that's all that's the guiding principle behind everything that we do. We just want to share that passion that we have for perfume with the customers.
And Laurent, you, in terms of the Ostens range and how it all started, when we spoke, I mean, it was fascinating to hear you describe it, and essentially, as I recall, I mean, you were able to get to work with some of the best perfumers in the world and almost give them carte blanche. Is that right?
That's exactly that. The idea, the starting point is the ingredient. So we selected out of the collection, the portfolio of around 400 natural ingredients at an amazing supplier called Laboratoire Monique Rémy. We selected 4 natural ingredients that we took to perfumers at IFF, which is one of the big perfume houses. And we basically told them, what do those ingredients inspire you, creatively speaking? What would you do with this ingredient? And it was really interesting because the perfumers are usually challenged and in a very, very framed way. And here it was a very open challenge. The only challenge was use this ingredient as the starting point for your creativity. You can have a lot of it or very little of it. You can make it very obvious or very discreet. It can be structurally important in the fragrance. It can be unimportant. It's up to you. And so that freedom was really interesting because that made people like Dominique Ropion, Alexis Dadier, Bruno Jovanovic, that challenged them in ways that was quite unusual for them, but which they all really truly enjoyed. And the creations that came out and that we helped shape afterwards, through corrections and through slight tweaks and so on, those creations are real, unadulterated ideas and creations from those perfumers. They were not decided by marketing boards. They were
market
not
research
decided market research and so on. They were really the perfumers, their idea expressed through the fragrance, and our understanding of it and our refinement of it. But actually, it was really fascinating the way when you leave creative minds express themselves in a really truly free way, the way they find a way straight to the original expression and to express themselves in an original way. It's really fascinating.
I think, and Ostens is a prime example of a brand where, you know, the celebration of the raw materials absolutely sits in front of, you know, marketing or branding and all that stuff. And, you know, sometimes we talk about, and it's not a sort of pejorative thing, but we can talk about the difference between some of the designer brands where there's, you know, a big old conglomerate and there's celebrities and there's, you know, expensive campaigns, you know, with film stars and all that kind of stuff. But the difference here is the star of the show is the ingredient. And I guess for customers, that's what they're paying for and that's what they're getting is you know, premium raw materials presented in a beautiful way. But the star of the show is the raw materials, right?
Well, it's like a chef or a restaurant. I always say, if you don't like fragrance, that's fine. But the process in to Ostens is more like when you go to a restaurant and you can taste the in-season white asparagus or the Williams pear or the Maya lemon that happens to be famous for the region or whatever, and then you get to see what the chefs do with it. And it's exactly that. I remember growing up in New Zealand in the 70s and everything baking-wise was made with vanilla essence. And I didn't know any different. And then I came to the UK and I remember going, I can't even remember where I went to. And there was a cake that was made with vanilla pod. And I was like, oh my goodness, what the hell is in this? It's amazing. And it was just because for the first time in my life, you know, I got to experience the real thing. And I think that's very much the basis of what Ostens is all about. Imagine when you've always heard that this fragrance has an ingredient like rose or cedarwood or patchouli, and actually, here's a fragrance with the real thing inside. And here's the real thing you can smell right next to it. And I think that's really what makes it so fascinating for us, is that our customers really connect with that. And what we've found is surprisingly a lot of men who potentially would be a little bit scared of coming into the fragrance world have really connected with this. Because, you know, I have a theory, like with fashion, or certainly my journey with fashion or skincare, it was very nerdy, it was very technical. So I came into the world and enjoyed fashion because of, you know, finding out how Barber waxes their jackets in a particular way and the process. And so it wasn't necessarily about style, it was about the nerdery around, you know, fabrics.
Technicalities.
Technicalities. And I think a lot of men tend to, and I know I'm really genderizing here, but tend to like to know how something's made, the processes, and what we try and do here with Ostens, obviously, you know, being a brand very much led by, you know, two men here, we appreciate that way in as well. And so we like sharing that with if you want to know more, you ask us all the questions. Otherwise, if you just want to come in and smell it, no problem. We'll spray it on, you know, a piece of a blotter, a muette, and then you can walk out.
But there's a real transparency about that as well, isn't there? It's like, you know, it's not, you're not trying to hide what's in there or try and market the fact that there isn't very much, you know, real ingredients in there. You know, people can come and talk to you and find out exactly what's in the fragrance, which I think is very refreshing. It'd be great to talk, as I often do on Man in the Mirror, just about how you feel about your appearance and how you feel about the men that look back at you in the mirror. I mean, Chris, you've already talked a little bit about your adolescence and skin and everything. Where are you now? Are you in your 40s, Chris?
Oh, you're so generous, and I'll take that. It's the end of the 40s. I think it's the technical term. So I'm a couple of years off 50, and it's the first time in my life I can truly say it's not that I'm just happy with what I see in the mirror. I'm really grateful for it. You know, like when I go to the gym now, or I'm like, wow, my body can still do that. You know, that's amazing. That as a tool, that as a machinery is phenomenal. And so I look at, my skin and I look at my hair, and I'm very lucky. I have Asian hair, which is very thick, and there's no signs of it going anywhere at this point. I sort of think, you know what, I'm really grateful for this, and I'm really happy because I get to sort of celebrate that. And I know that sounds quite a bit woo-woo, but it's not as conscious as that. It's just a point where I'm like, yeah, we're good. Let's go. Let's get 90 minutes later. Yes, let's go out the door.
No, I don't think that sounds strange at all. And I guess perhaps contrasting with maybe, I don't want to put these feelings on you, but maybe some of the feelings you had when you were younger, there's a contrast now to celebration and loving yourself and feeling totally happy, which is what a great thing. That's amazing.
I remember my mother when I was sort of teenage, 16, I think, and she said, "You don't realize I still feel 20 years old inside." And I remembered that, but I never really connected with it. Now I'm like, hell, I know how that feels. And yes, there's still that sort of 16-year-old in me that is a bit self-conscious of my face, but that I'm grateful for too, because as a journey, that's what's made me very self-aware of my feelings, my appearance, etc. But now I get to live in it, it feels very comfortable. Like imagine just every day being able to wear sweatpants or whatever. It's that level of comfort in my own body. Yeah. And I think for me, being sort of a child that was very much overweight as well, and in growing up in New Zealand, which was a sporting culture, I never connected I felt like it wasn't for me. And now at, like I said, nearly 50, are you
into it now?
I love going to the gym. I love being physical. And it's not because it just because it changes my appearance. That it almost is the last part of it. It's the meditative way that I can sort of be in my body. There's nothing more grounding and making you more present than sort of the eighth rep of, 3 sets where you're like, I'm literally focused on the next 2 seconds. My brain races a lot certainly with work. And I'm not great with meditation or those sort of apps that a lot of people find success with. I'm not very patient. So I find I need physical things to slow me down. Yeah. And certainly exercise and weightlifting in this example is the only thing that just makes me stop.
Yeah, keeps you in the moment and be present. Yeah, that's really interesting. And how about you, Laurent? How do you feel when you see Laurent in the morning in the mirror?
Well, despite the fact that we are exactly the same age, I've had the inverse problem to Chris. When I was in my early 20s, people thought I was already in my mid-40s. So it really is quite so God knows what they think, how old I am today.
But why was that, Laurent? Why did people think that?
I just always had a more mature look about me of some sort, I guess. I have no idea. It's maybe the facial hair. I have literally, or maybe my overall behavior. I have zero idea. So I've always accepted that I was perceived differently from the outside than I am actually really am. And for sure, perceived differently from how I feel inside as well, which is definitely not my late 40s, approaching 50. That's for sure. The getting older is really quite unavoidable, isn't it? So
it is.
It's that old joke is, I much prefer getting older than the alternative of not getting older anymore, right? So it's being dead. So that's fine by me. And the happiness element, and I hate the gym. I positively hate the gym. I tried pretty much every boxing, cycling, spinning, weightlifting, anything you can possibly imagine. I gave it 2 minutes, and it's simply not for me. The balance for me comes more from more introspective. Give me a cigar and an aged whiskey, and I'll be very, very happy with that. That will make me that will reset me for the evening and for the week to come. So quite a different approach to life overall, for sure.
It's really interesting that, you know, and perhaps it's why you two work so well together. There's a really nice sort of yin and yang to a lot of things about you, isn't there? Maybe sort of your approaches, but I guess it works well together.
Can you imagine if I had my own 90 minutes routine in the morning? We'd never get any work done, or suddenly it would be some kind of like arms race to, mine is now 95 minutes now. I've added another ingredient. It's 98 minutes.
I mean, how long does it take to smoke a cigar, Laurent? Is it 90 minutes?
Yeah, pretty much. But you don't do that in the morning.
Those work guys who, sort of have a business meeting on the treadmill together. I just couldn't imagine anything worse than, that kind of stuff. Like, hey, let's strategize as we run or do weights and stuff. This just sounds horrendous. I think that's quite, at least you've got your own things that you do and that make you happy. So if Laurent's happiness comes from a fine cigar and a whiskey, how about you, Chris? What are the things, spontaneously that you would say would make you happy?
The thing that makes me the happiest is singing. So I sing in a sort of a cappella pop quest. Think Glee. Think, Glee. And I know a 50-year-old man running around on stage is probably the last thing you want to think about.
Yeah.
Pitch Perfect. Totally. I'm Fat Amy of Pitch Perfect. The Aussie funny one.
And all that.
Yeah, exactly. And again, talking about, meditation and stuff like that, I can't do it. So when I'm singing, it's the only time I stop thinking, and it's about thinking of others. For me, singing is about, especially in a cappella, you have to tune in with everyone else. So it's about being part of the whole. Mm-hmm. And I love that. I just think, and I hate doing solos. I hate being out front. I just love blending with everyone else. And I sing for a couple of hours every Monday night. And it's like the thing that sets me off for that and gym. If I can get that in, then I will be extremely happy for the rest of the week. It fills me up.
Right. And what's your vocal? Are you a
so
tenor?
I'm a tenor. I'm a top tenor, which is slightly higher. It just brings me so much joy.
Do you do pop stuff?
Yeah, so we're mostly, it's exactly like Pitch Perfect. We sing pop songs that have been rearranged to a cappella. Yeah.
But you don't have to do all the kind of mad dance cheerleading bits and all that as well.
I mean,
he does.
We try.
You don't have to say, dude, is there some moves?
Varying degrees of success. I'm the oldest one in the choir, so I am probably the least flexible, shall we say.
We can all get tickets to Chris's next show.
Please come along.
Well, Chris, Laurent, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been so great to connect again and to hear a bit more about Ostens. I should say as well, we talked about Ostens fragrances, but there's candles, isn't there, as well?
Our whole career has been in candles for other people's brands, from Diptyque to Citrodon and Fornasetti. And so finally to be able to launch our own candles under the Ostens brand has been such a joy. And that is out literally this week. So you've hit us at the right time. Not that we're trying to plug anything here. I feel like we're in a late show and I'm about to plug my new movie,
Hold the book up. Yeah. No, the candles are beautiful. And what I'll do in the show notes is obviously link to some of the products that Chris and Laurent have talked about, and also how you can find out more about Ostens. But for now, thank you both so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to see you both soon.
Great to see you, Hayden. Thank you.
Take care. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. My thanks to Laurent and Chris there from Ostens. I don't know about you, I found that really interesting. As I said at the beginning, it's one of my favourite fragrance brands anyway, but really fascinating to hear more from the founders, and particularly Chris's honesty there about sort of adolescent skincare and acne, and how it affected him, but how he's got to a place now where he's so much happier in his skin, quite literally, and you know, the products he uses, I certainly found that really useful. If you want to find out more about Ostens, you can do. Their website is ostens.com, and that's Ostens, Ostens.com. And on Instagram, you can find them at Ostens, Ostens_official. That's Ostens_official. I do implore you to have a look at the fragrances and the candles they have in their range. Beautiful products. As I said in the podcast, with ingredients as the star of the show, and I'm sure you'll find something that you'll like there. And if you ever get the chance to go to the showroom in central London, if you're ever this way in the UK, it's a fascinating experience, and you'll likely get to talk directly to Chris or Laurent about the range and you know, hear it from them themselves. So thanks to Chris, thanks to Laurent, and thanks to you for joining me on Man in the Mirror podcast this week. And I'll see you again soon. Take care.